This is a really fun moment. One of the ways that I thought about this is launching into a series to go deeper into some of the topics that I had a chance to talk about in that TEDx. And I had something happen a few years ago when I was in India where I was asking a leader there, what is the number one leadership competency from your perspective for a leader to be effective in India? And this is what he said. He said, the ability to master context quickly. The ability to master context quickly. And what was the reason why he was saying about it? Because the organization that he's running, it's literally like you would go from village to village. And India is so diverse that the food changes a mile down the road. And so, and I know that it depends on when you're talking about India, you can't talk about India with a bunch of hyperbole. You have to be careful because it's like, I don't understand it well enough to pretend, having been there 8 times, I just get to scratch the surface. But I would say this, that there is something that has been, that he said to me, that has been a continuing theme when I would teach students, graduate students over the years. One of the things that I was trying to bring awareness to for them as they go out to lead was to understand the difference between content and context. And also to understand which way their brain more naturally goes so that they don't default to it without seeing the other half. And I think most of you know in your leadership roles, if there is a meta theme, even as we described this today, is I want to talk about, just to frame up and sort of set the stage for the TED talk I gave, but to look at it through the lens of context and content. Does that make sense? So we can go there. Because I think for some of you, I realize that a lot of people are like, what was that like? And so some of you are like, I'm kind of curious. Some of you might even want to do one at some point. And it's just, and so I want to set some of that, but also talk about the content of the talk itself and some of the things that we're going to talk about in the coming weeks. Because I tried to drop some bombs in there. And so as we get into this, some of the lessons, just to give you some of the larger context, is that doing a TEDx has been a developmental goal of mine for at least 10 years. And there were a variety of reasons why that was important. I mean, that's a long time. And Daniel mentioned that the other day. He said, we were first talking about this almost 10 years ago. And so it was something that I wanted to do. This particular talk was born out of 25 years or so, almost 3 decades, of an integration of my own understanding of psychological science, and it's more specifically industrial organizational psychology, Veronica. It's like I wanted to bring that, but also my experience of leaders and my own experience of leading, and something also I would say, to be honest, that's deeper in my faith and my philosophical orientation of the world and what I experience in leaders every day. And so it was kind of this integrative moment for me to bring all that together in a really short amount of time, by the way. And I think also to bring a voice that sort of highlights the brokenness and also our need for some kind of wholeness that we aspire to. And I think it was this integrative moment for me. And I'll tell you that it was a different type of setting and stage as well. So it was not only an opportunity to present some of those things on my heart, but also to learn a new way of presenting. And to build what I described, like I'm sometimes I don't know if I sound this way, but I had this kind of manifesto. I kind of wanted to see if I could do that, to sort of set a stage for a whole leader development manifesto and bring my convictions and also about the controversies inherent in what whole and intentional leader development is about. So as we go into this, there's a few things that I think this whole issue of context and content, So context, listen to the definition of this. These wild conversations get me a chance to get deeper too. And so I looked up the definition of context. Listen to this. It's defined as the circumstances that form the setting for an event, for a statement, for an idea, or in terms of which it can be fully understood or assessed. So in other words, it's the circumstances around that moment that are important to understand to make sense out of it. And then another definition was the interrelated conditions in which something exists or occurs, interrelated conditions in which something occurs, or the parts of something written or spoken that immediately precede and follow a word or passage and clarify its meaning. So there's a word if you were to go to seminary that you have to study in theology called hermeneutics. And so it's the understanding of the context around a passage. And so I'm fascinated by that because as leaders, we have to be masters of this. I mean, it's just something that is so critical for us, but I think it's a deep, deep skill that develops over time. And then the content side, this is Rob's definition. What is actually happening or being shared in that moment? So like, what is the content, right? And so let's start off with, I want to start off with kind of 4 leadership lessons. I think, I guess I may not break these cleanly into context and content, but maybe you can figure that out for yourself. But these are some leadership lessons I learned from actually doing the talk. Does that make sense? Before we get into the content of the talk, this is what I learned. So the first thing was this: lead with purpose. Lead with purpose. Some of you have heard me like I'm a broken record about this, but let me share my purpose in doing this, which I realized when I prepared for this, it's too big. So just forgive me for that. I think it needs to be refined, but I just had a lot of different purposes about this. First and foremost, TEDx is a stage that invites more people into the movement you are trying to communicate. I knew that. I just wanted, I've given this talk in some form or another many times, but it's just different. You know, people think of it differently. So I knew that was true. My hope was, and is, because that was the purpose of trying to see if I could do one. My hope was, and is, to invite as many like-minded people as possible, or those who have not felt a home in partial responses to their problem of leading, of work, of life, or of just relationships. They're like, there's more. I want to go more. I want to go there. My purpose was to call out the brokenness in the world and within the leaders that I see every day, including myself. So I'll tell you that my purpose wasn't to say like, all of the greatness is within you. Like, that's just not me. It's like, yeah, there is great stuff that you will do, but I think there's more going on than just that voice. And that's just my voice into it. My purpose was to provide a vision of wholeness and an invitation to move toward the questions so many people are asking. My purpose was to get help creating a video that might inspire others into it. And developmentally, my hope was to do as good a job as I could at this point in my life with the tools that I have learned over the years. And I'll tell you that, you know, you watch yourself do any talk, you know this, right? You watch yourself on video and you're like, okay. I mean, I watched that thing and there's like 5 things I would fix. And if someone else says there aren't 5 things they would fix, they're lying to themselves, right? There's just things that you would want to do better. And so all that was going on, but I wanted to provide a real conversation, to be myself in this moment, and to provide a home for the masses of what I believe are the silent people who are tired of the same old rhetoric of blame in some cases, and maybe provide a vision of hope. I don't know, something that they might be able to actually work on and control. And then I mentioned I wanted to do this as a manifesto. So leading with purpose, like there was a lot of stuff that this was this cumulative moment for me to do this. Leadership lesson number 2. This was the tough one. Be yourself with a willingness to edit. Be yourself with a willingness to edit, a willingness to change, a willingness even to have the backspace key hit on things that feel like they're part of my character. That's where it gets tough, right? Wouldn't it be easy if I could just say, live your truth, Dean McKay, and that's all it's about? Like, it's like, yeah, but then how do we do that together? Thomas Merton said, no man is an island. And I think no man are, you know, none of us are on an island. We're like doing this together. So be yourself with the willingness to edit. You got to be the parts of yourself. This is framing that I was thinking about doing this talk that are effective, and edit the parts that aren't. It's about you and it's about the audience. But in the end, you have to deliver. So a couple of things about that is they assign you a coach. And so I had 2 coaches actually. And it was a really interesting process of getting coaches. And I'll tell you that even the most seasoned speakers struggle with doing a TEDx. It's just, I mean, I didn't realize that. I heard it over and over again. About 6 of the 12 maybe had done a lot of speaking. This makes it's just different. And you submit multiple practice videos, you get a lot of feedback, which makes you go like, well, what do you want? You know, it's like trying to figure it out. More context is that I shared with my coach that my convictions are strong, but that sometimes I question whether people might dismiss me or put me in a box of privilege before they actually know my whole story. I'm just telling you that's my story in this. And I was worried about that, and a whole story that I don't share with very many people, which I don't think you do either, right? We all have things that are a part of ours. I'm not going to blurt them out all the time, but some of you know pieces of my whole story. And so that was, but what he said to me was interesting, and it really was helpful. He said, Rob, your vulnerability is your superpower. And I don't actually have a problem. I probably share. My wife's always like, you're sharing more than you should. Like, it's like people don't want the cash register. The person working the cash register doesn't want to know how many kids we have. But so it's like, I don't really struggle with some of that. I got that from my mother. But at the same time, it was helpful to know, to give me courage to say the vulnerability, maybe someone would be inspired by me being willing to do that. My wife and my two of my closest friends were there. Daniel Halleck was there. And I did the rehearsal the day before, and I got feedback that my passion and conviction are awesome and a lot. So I got that. Like, they were like, you're literally like, your whole body is just like, I got that feedback. And so one of the coaches said, you need to maybe mellow out a bit and just kind of like, just breathe a bit. And then it was interesting. He said, this is what he said to me. Now, you know, there's a red dot, right? So you got to stay on the dot. You know, you have to stay on the dot. And so the coach said, he also said, were you a boxer? And I was like, why is he asking if I was a boxer? And he said, because you move like one. And the reason why I move like one on that stage was because of the red dot. So I've also gotten feedback historically. I think I've fixed this. And on stages, I move like a caged cat. So I just move a lot. And so, but I don't like that. I wanted to fix that because I realized it's distracting for people. But when you have a dot, think of what movement looks like. It looked like this. So it's little tiny steps, because I can't take big steps. So then he's like, were you a boxer? I'm like, I've never even been in a boxing ring. I don't know what you're talking about. So, but I understand why he said that. And then he's the same coach that told me I was intense and a little bit like kind of extra. And so I was kind of like, okay, this is the day before. So what do I do with that? You know, this is on the practice stage. I was on the main stage. And so then the other coach, I talked to him and he said, that's just who you are. So now what do you do? Right, Susan? Do you do I back off? So I just decided to kind of try to be a little bit of both of those things. He also gave me some great advice as well, and I'll tell you in just a moment. So, and then the third leadership lesson was master the context. So one of the reasons I told you I did this was for the developmental challenge. A few years ago, before I had done this, I had this goal of speaking more often on stages with more than 500 people. And it was just a stretch for me because I'd done a lot of smaller group stuff, you know, many years ago. And so I wanted to do that. And here's one contextual thing that most people find really interesting. When you speak in a room with 1,500 or more, I don't know what the actual math is, but think of a room that's that size. Usually there's big screens. Are you with me, Beth? So there's these big screens. So here's the thing. People don't look at the speaker. What do they look at? They look at the screen. So think about this. And another coach taught me this. This is this context, right? Of realizing what is the space you are in? What's going on in that space? And this other coach told me probably 10, 15 years ago, he said, you have one moment in like a 20 to 30 minute talk to look at the camera, because what happens when you look at the camera? Everybody in that room, all 1,500 plus people, think you're looking straight at their face. So it's a moment, and you get one of those moments, and it's just, and you can watch, it's crazy. You can look at that. If you say something funny or you kind of beat up on yourself in just a moment, and you go like, and then I did this. And everybody in that room thinks, and it roars. It's just interesting how different, even size of room matters. So I'm just a student of that stuff. I used to study comedians because I was like, I want to be funnier because people like to laugh. And I feel like I'm so intense. So I started studying, like, how do comedians make people laugh? I want people to have some joy, you know? So that's just some of that. And I think one of the other pieces of the TED Talk, and I got to get to my other points, is this. I hope this is interesting to some of you. Is that in this case, one of my other friends who's done a couple of TEDx's said, keep this in mind. First of all, you have no chance to recover. So in a normal keynote speech, you have time to recover if you miss, which was kind of true and kind of not, because you can't believe the TED Talks that you love that are out there have been edited. Most of us don't know that. So there is a lot of editing afterwards. So you actually can recover. It's just, you have to, you actually stop and start over in parts. I didn't do that, but other speakers that I was with there did. The other piece of it is this, is to realize when you're doing a TEDx, this was so interesting. You're not really speaking to the audience that's there. You're speaking to the cameras. And it's because the purpose of them is to create a video that might last. Now that's tricky for me, because I'll tell you in a moment why that does become tricky. And so the last leadership lesson is master how you show up. So let me tell you about some of the specifics around this. So the first thing is this. You got to stand on the dot. That red carpet, they always have it, TEDx's or TED's, like, stay on the dot. I watched one of the speakers go off the dot. I was like, I got really anxious, like, stay on the dot. So that's one thing. Number two, for me, this is mastering how I showed up. End sentence with significant periods. End sentences with significant periods. You see what I just did? I ended this sentence with a significant period. So, and it's actually changed my writing. This is one thing that the Twitter world has helped me with, is to try to write with the intent that if someone grabbed one sentence from your paper or your book, it would be valuable. What if you wrote every sentence that way? So that's my point with that, is like trying to figure out what that looks like. Get personal right away, and then show that I'm editing with them. I wanted people to feel an invitation, so that's why I started with something personal. Be interesting if you haven't seen this yet, to do this after I'm saying all this stuff. Do not hesitate to let emotion flow. If you saw at the end, I almost started to cry. So I was like, okay, it's kind of, but I just like let it go. Do not qualify your thoughts. This is hard for me because everything has nuance, and there is a lot to describe. That's the reality of whole leader development. So I usually don't shy away from nuance, but in this, don't qualify, go big. And then I know this, I'm also motivated by influencing the one. So pick someone in the audience who I can see is connecting with something deeply inspiring and moving them. And so I'll never forget, I don't remember her name. There was a woman with purple hair sitting in the third row. And I could see immediately, she's like, I need this. And so she was my target for the whole thing. So on the content side, I'm going to go through these. We're going to break down the content. And I don't know. I just hope some of that's helpful to you all, by the way. Like, as you think about your own speaking, that some of those principles might help. And I'll continue. I haven't mastered them. These are things I'll continue to think about if I ever get to do one again, or wherever I speak. By the way, I went to speak in front of a group of 2,000 the week after. Do you know how easy that is? It was like a piece of cake compared to doing a TEDx. Just nothing. It was like, at one point in my talk in front of that larger group, I forgot what I was going to say next. And it's like, when you talk about recovery, you can kind of fill in with like, so this is important. And in my mind, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm saying next. This is important. It took me about 10 seconds to find myself again. You can't do that in a TED Talk. So it was just, anyway, more than you want to know. So here are some things in terms of principles on the content that I won't get into a lot of, but these are things that we'll talk about in the coming weeks that were some of my main points. There's 5 of them. And you all know there's a lot to break down, but we have time. We've got future sessions, and I hope you'll come back and invite some other folks too. Is this. It's first of all that I described this as a manifesto, and I wanted people to feel an invitation personally, but then I also wanted them to hear what's on my heart. And this reality that, and I said this, that few of us would deny that our world is in the midst of a reformation. And I say it this way, a radical change in values and dividing polarities. And I talked about the tensions between relativism and fundamentalism, liberty and security, justice and mercy, love and truth, or diversity and unity. Like, these are the paradoxes of our time. And here is my concern that I didn't say in the talk, is that the challenge today is that the paradoxes in our reality, in many cases, have become one-sided weapons. Like, we swing back and forth as opposed to living in the human tension of these things, the human tension of bringing voice and staying connected to other people, that leaders have to understand. And I say this is a little bit of a bold statement. So just let me say it, and then maybe I'll back off. But when the tensions in our reality become weapons, we lose touch with our capacity to talk about the real things in life. And I would say things like love, forgiveness, the ability to make progress, to redeem, to be vulnerable, to change, and to lead with wisdom before blind conviction. And we can talk about that more in coming weeks, and what I'm trying to describe there, because I look at all your faces and I look at the leaders who I know, and I'm thinking that it's so hard to lead in this world. So here are my 5 things. One is that courageous and sacrificial leaders are the primary tool to solving the most pressing challenges of our world. I really do believe that. I don't know if it's the only tool, but it is one of the primary tools. And I do believe personally that they are tools. I describe them as tools because they are tools in a much larger story. Number two, leaders go first. Some of you have heard me say that so many times. And when they do, everything changes. Everything changes. And it's interesting. One of the things I've thought about in these last few weeks is that one of the greatest challenges, and one of the things I'm fascinated by leaders, is that leaders are responsible for everyone, and they're responsible for everyone. Do you hear me? Like leaders, like that's why your job's hard. I'm responsible for all of you, and I'm responsible for you. And that's just this amazing opportunity, but it is so difficult in so many cases. Number four, actually, maybe this is three. I think I narrowed it down. Whole leader development is a reformation in our thinking. And it highlights, it's something that I believe we cannot ignore, that brokenness exists around us and within us. And without that understanding, grace is lost or becomes a ghost in our experience. We can't fail on this one. This is why I think people that are drawn to wild leaders and what we're doing here is like people that go like, yes, finally, we're having a whole conversation. And then finally, you heard me talk about this. We'll do a session on this. It will start and end with questions as an invitation to wholeness. And we'll break that down. There's so much to talk about in the power of questions in terms of inviting change. So let's go out and talk and get smarter together, Megan.